So, our message for today takes us back to Matthew 26. And I invite you to open up to Matthew 26 again. We're going to continue in some ways where we left off, actually looking maybe a little bit more deeply at part of the story that we looked at last time. So, last week we listened in on Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane, and we noticed amazingly that he was deciding what to do in the case that he and his Father wanted two different things. We stopped and asked, how in the world did this situation come about? That Jesus and the Father, who have dwelt together in perfect unity throughout all of eternity, could be at this place where they're, if we dare use the words, where they're in conflict with one another. Where it isn't so simple as Jesus, said earlier in his ministry, I always do what pleases the Father. Now he's saying, please, if there's any other way, please. Nevertheless, not my will, but yours be done. And we saw that it was because of our sin, my sin, that Jesus now is facing separation from his Father for the first time in all eternity, to ensure that we might not be separated from the Father for all eternity. Are you worshiping that God this morning? Have you come to this place because of the beauty of that kind of love and that character? I hope so. Because we also then consider Jesus as an example in this story. An example of love, an example of submission. But I would suggest that our love, our ability to love, our ability to follow Jesus as an example is directly dependent on our willingness to receive the love that he offers. We love because he first loved us. Freely give. Why? Because you have freely received. Freely you have received, freely give. And so we're going to look at the story through the lens of Jesus' example a little bit today, and what we can learn about living a life of love by looking at how Jesus loved his Father in this incident, in this story. So look back at the story there in Matthew 26, verses 36 to 44. And I'm just going to read a portion of it again, just to bring us back into the story. Then Jesus went with his disciples to a place called Gethsemane. And he said to them, sit here while I go over there and pray. He took Peter and the two sons of Zebedee along with him, and he began to be sorrowful and troubled. Then he said to them, my soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death. Stay here and keep watch with me. Going a little farther, he fell with his face to the ground and prayed, my Father, if it is possible, may this cup be taken from me. Yet not as I will, but as you will. So when Jesus found himself in conflict, on the brink of conflict with his Father, what did he do? What was his first means to deal with that conflict? He prayed. And prayer is a technical term, right? That means something. And maybe it means something a little different to us than it means to Jesus, because our relationship with the one we're praying to is perhaps a little different than Jesus's. If you were talking about it in human terms, right? Say I have a conflict with Dave, what would be the equivalent?
Talk to him.
Yeah, to talk to him. Jesus talked to, not Anthony when he had a problem with Dave, right? He talked to Dave. He talked to his Father directly. He's got a conflict with his Father, so he goes to him directly to deal with it. Jesus doesn't let the conflict turn into a bigger problem. He doesn't allow this to fester. He doesn't push it under the carpet. He brings it out in the open and addresses it. There's a huge lesson right there, right? If that was all we got from this story. we could often prevent conflict from becoming more of a problem than it needs to be if we simply followed Jesus' example. And when there is a conflict, when there is a disagreement, when there's a difficulty, we simply went straight to the person that's involved and talked about it with them. My wife is actually very good at this, and how you approach a person in that situation often makes a big difference. But one of the brilliant things that she does is she will say to me, "Bruce, I've noticed that your voice has gone up in pitch considerably, and you're starting to speak in clipped tones. And I'm wondering if maybe you're angry about something." Now, after someone has gently pointed out, the evidence, the details, it's much more difficult to argue, or you find yourself saying things like, "I'm not angry," which doesn't convince anyone, right? But she's brilliant at recognizing something perhaps before it happens and easing into an open conversation. Let's talk about it, rather than wait for something bad or worse to happen. After Jesus addresses his Father by name, what are the two contrasting parts of his prayer? The two contrasting parts of his prayer. You can talk to me. You have your Bibles open. Look there. Who's got the two contrasting parts of Jesus' prayer?
He didn't want to go through it.
Okay?
Because he was human.
He doesn't want to go through it. His words are, "If it is possible,
Right.
let this cup pass from me." Right? So that's one piece of his prayer. What's the other piece?
But your will be done.
Nevertheless, yes, not as I will, but your will be done. These two parts. When I looked at this, just trying to grasp what this prayer is about and the message that's in it for us, for me, one of the first things that jumped out at me was, why does he even say, "If it is possible, let this cup pass from me," when he's about to go on and say, "Nevertheless, not my will, but yours be done"?
Oh, we pray like that a lot.
Right?
We pray for something and we should say, "If it be thy will."
And I think when we do that, we are catching one of the lessons from here. But I just want you to catch some of the significance of this, and I may come back to you to push a little bit there. Why, if you're going to say, "We'll do it your way," why say, "Could we please do it my way"? What does that, why do that?
Maybe you can convince the other party to do it your way.
All right, so humanly speaking, right, you negotiate, you are hoping maybe, and clearly Jesus says, if it is possible, right, if there is some other way. So he's asking, please, tell me at the last moment you discovered some other way. We made these plans from all eternity past. We knew once sin, came in, that this was going to be the only way. But please tell me that since I've been here on earth and am limited somehow in my humanity, that you have discovered another way. Right? So he's asking for that. But just in the flow of the conversation, when you're going to say, "We're going to do it your way," anyway, at the end, what is the role of saying, "Could we please do it my way"? And so, you're saying, well, maybe you can convince the person. I don't know that Jesus thought he was really going to convince the Father. Maybe he held out some hope that there was actually a better way. But in your relationships, right? Yeah. What is the function of that part of the conversation? You've had those conversations where you pretty much know it's going to go the other person's way, but you still ask for what you want. Why, Mary? Were you?
Could it be like a debate, maybe?
I think there is a piece of that, right? That we're talking, it's negotiation. Please let's reconsider. What were you going to add?
And maybe too, God was trying to, he wanted to reveal to us what he had to give up. And that this side of God saying, hey, is there any other way? But then at the same time, he had to yield to the purpose. And for us to see that, gives us, illustrate how much it took.
It is, this passage is significant for us to understand that the cross cost God something. You know, there are people who would say, well, I know what the big deal is. He was only dead for, however many hours, and he knew he was going to be resurrected. Well, obviously, it's not quite that simple. And so we get a glimpse into that.
Yeah.
But I'm specifically, that's how it helps us. I'm specifically thinking about it in the relationship. What is the point of saying, please, can we do it my way? If you've already decided, let's do it your way. I'm willing to do it your way. We aren't going to do it my way. But there is that bit of just in case in there.
Was he trying to show us or to help us to realize that he was actually human and that he really didn't want to go through all this hanging on the cross nonsense?
I think that makes sense. Again, that's looking at it for what do we learn from it? What is he, but is he just pantomiming a conversation with his Father so that we'll learn something from it? Or are we viewing here a real conversation between real people? I tend to think that we're viewing a real conversation between real people. And as I, wrestled and struggled with this, maybe I can illustrate it from some experiences in my own life. So when my wife and I were first dating, she's a take charge sort of person, right? She is good at envisioning something that does not yet exist, and then maneuvering things to bring about that vision. I mean, she's brilliant at it. You can call it leadership, you can call it vision, you can call it just, knowing what you want. But she's brilliant at that. And as we were dating, many, many times, if there was a decision about what we were going to do, she had already thought about it and had a plan in mind and, envisioned what we were going to do. And I was only too happy to participate in the great ideas that she had. And so I would happily, go along with whatever she had dreamt up. But I remember the first time that wasn't really working for me. Maybe it wasn't the first time, but the time when it came to a head, we'll put it that way. That it occurred to me, finally, that there had been a few times now when what she had in mind to do was not actually my first preference, but that I had gone along with what she had in mind because I was anxious to hold on to this relationship. And I was afraid that if I objected or argued or stated an opinion that was different or expressed my desire for a different plan, that she would be disappointed and angry or upset or unhappy with me for having expressed a different viewpoint. Well, this particular time, it came to a head. I had had enough. Well, I don't even remember what the situation was, what we were planning to do, if I was just tired or what it was. But I finally said something along the lines of, how can we always have to do whatever you want to do? How come we can't do what I want? And she looked at me just aghast, And at first I thought, she just doesn't get this. And then she said, we don't have to do what I want to do. I'd be perfectly happy, to do what you want to do. You haven't offered anything. You didn't say that you weren't happy doing it. How was I supposed to know? And the reality was, I hadn't said anything. There was no way for her to know. I had just glibly gone along with. But she was actually, not only not offended that I didn't want to go along with what she had in mind, but she was grateful that I had finally showed up. Right? Because in effect, now this was from our sermon a few weeks back when we were on Zoom. We looked at that passage in 1 Corinthians 13 that talks about love being a face-to-face relationship as opposed to a mirror relationship. With social distancing and Zoom and YouTube, we get maybe something a little bit better than a mirror, but it's still an image, right? You all online, sorry, no offense. You're watching an image of me on the screen. You can't reach through there and smack me, if I'm off base. You could make a remark in the chat. And Michael, we got a comment here saying that the sound is very good today. So thank you for your ministry up there. The reality is that a real relationship with a real person has to involve the real person, right? You can't have a real relationship with someone who is just projecting an image of themselves for you. And so here I had been glibly going along as though, I don't know, I'm happy with everything. But I was faking it at some level. And so finally I really showed up in the relationship. And it turns out I had some conflict to deal with. We didn't agree perfectly about everything at that point in time. Now it turns out, I have no idea what the decision was, whatever that was, we sorted it out, we figured it out, we came out with some solution that we were all happy with. But it wouldn't happen if I hadn't shown up. And so I think some of what's going on here is Jesus is showing up. He's a real person in this relationship. He is asking for what he wants in the relationship.
I'm wondering whether he may have thought, he was wondering whether God may have, or the Father may have changed his mind since the original plan.
You've got to hold out hope, right? I mean, this is the last chance to ask. By the way, is there a plan B? Has something else come up? It is the last chance to ask. But Jesus asks, even though he knows he's about to say, nevertheless, not my will, but yours be done. He asks for what he wants because he's a real person in a real relationship with someone that he loves. And he's got to show up and be there for this relationship.
Can we have a different opinion or a different idea without getting angry with whatever it is the other person is suggesting?
I think if we went, like Jesus gives us the example, Dave asked in case you didn't hear that, can we have a different opinion? Can we be a different person in a relationship without it leading to angry conflict? Can we, dare I say it this way, can we have conflict without it being inherently a negative thing? I mean, if you take conflict simply to mean two different views, two different ways of looking at it, two different sets of desires, then absolutely we can have conflict that is not sinful or evil. The fact that Jesus wants something different from his Father, he is not committed a sin here by saying, if there's some other way, please. Were you going to add something, Anthony?
You've been married 36 years or so. You do change.
You do.
Since I was 20-something years old, now I'm 60-something. So I started to say, well, I don't think like that anymore. And so there's a conflict comes again.
Yeah, so this is fascinating. Anthony's pointing out that in a long-term relationship, you have to keep those lines of communication open. Because the fact that I was happy 2 weeks ago to go along with whatever my wife suggested, my girlfriend at the time, I was dating, doesn't mean I'm still happy to go along with whatever she suggested. And she tends to be a person who takes you at face value. So it's hard to tell her jokes because she will take it at face value. But that also means when she has a brilliant idea and says, hey, let's go do this, unless you tell her, no, I don't want to, she will assume everything's good and that we're just going and running with it. And there's anything wrong with that. You just have to recognize, hey, I have to show up in this relationship if it's going to be a good one. And as time goes on, what you want in a relationship may change. How's the other person going to know that if you don't talk? And so Jesus and the Father have had a very long relationship. But Jesus still shows up here to say, here's where I'm at right now in this relationship. Could we please do this some other way? And Jesus sets many good examples there. Right? You could say he has good boundaries. Are you familiar with that term? A relationship term. If you're not familiar with Cloud and Townsend's books and series on boundaries, everybody's got boundaries around them, right? Whether it's your skin, or whether it's your beliefs, or whether it's where you're willing to go. We've had that amplified, right? With the COVID-19, our boundaries. You all are kind of sitting a safe distance from each other, and frankly, if you came right up to me and tried to give me a hug right now, you would experience, air hugs, sorry, you would experience some of my boundaries, right? We're trying to be safe and kind of keep things at a safe distance right now. Jesus had good boundaries. Not that he was rebellious against his Father, but he was able to identify what he wanted in any given situation. And he didn't just sort of disappear, even though he would say to his Father, nevertheless, not my will, but yours be done. He clearly identified, but this is where I stand in this. He made it clear that he and the Father, though they are one in purpose, were distinct persons, personalities, whatever that means in God's, the interpersonal relationships of the Godhead. Jesus valued his relationship with his Father. Now this is going to sound strange. He valued having a good relationship with his Father more than he valued his own life. In other words, he wasn't willing to go into the cross at odds with his Father or avoid the cross against the will of his Father. He wanted to be in harmony with the will of his Father, even if it killed him. And that's sort of a strange thing to say, because to be in a right relationship with his Father, to be in harmony with his Father, meant the breaking of that relationship. Right? It's like we were saying when I was on the phone with my girlfriend, fiance, she would get mad at me for not hanging up the phone so we could go to sleep and see each other in the morning. And I found it so hard to let go of the relationship, right? To let go and hang up the phone, that I was actually damaging the relationship, right? She was mad at me for, please let me go. Jesus wanted to make sure before he went to bed that night that he and the Father were on good terms. And that he was a real person in that relationship. Some bad illustrations, but kind of like a person who's willing to grant a divorce to their spouse rather than fight over it. Or maybe a better illustration, the person who is willing to let the boyfriend or girlfriend go, who wants to break up with them, to let them go because they actually do love them and care about them enough to let them go. So Jesus isn't praying just to get his way, and he isn't praying just to give in. He's praying to maintain the relationship. He's talking with his Father to stay in relationship with him through this darkest of dark times. He's praying so that he could receive, well, hopefully what he wanted, right? Please tell me there's a plan B. Or what the Father wanted, without resenting the Father whichever way it went. Now, I would suggest this is a model for any healthy relationship. To ask for what you want, right? But to give the other person permission to say no to you. And if you've ever been in a relationship where you or the other person didn't actually ask for what they wanted, and then perhaps began to resent not getting it, or maybe you've been in a relationship where somebody didn't give you permission to say no, or maybe you didn't give them permission to say no, and you're being dragged along and resenting it, you have, I would guess all of you have personal experience with what happens when either one of those pieces is missing in a relationship.
Well, what's wrong with just ordinary conversation about talking about things?
Nothing.
Can we just have conversation without one person being disappointed or getting angry or?
It all depends. Dave's asking, can't we just have a conversation without it, having such high stakes? And I would say yes, if it's about what color of paint. Never mind, that's a high stakes conversation. I still remember one of the conversations my wife and I had was over decorating a bathroom. And we were at the store, and she was pulling out things and throwing them on the floor and looking and trying. And she couldn't decide. She was trying to get my opinion. How we decide here? This or this or this. And I was just not into it. I was not much help. I was like, whatever. I don't really care. And she was getting frustrated with me for being no help, with this decorating decision. And I finally said, well, okay, to tell you the truth, I'm not into this because I don't like any of that stuff. If I could decorate the bathroom the way I wanted to decorate it, here's what appeals to me. This is what I would like to see. And she said, really? Well, I wonder if they've got any of that here. And we went and poked around and looked, and sure enough, they did. And she said, I like that too. That's great. Let's do it your way. And we still have a bathroom decorated that way to this day, and I love it. So the question is, you can have a normal conversation about things that are inconsequential. But when you're talking about the saving of the world over my dead body, now the stakes are a little bit higher. And Jesus models for us how to navigate a high-stakes disagreement in a gracious, gracious way. You ask for what you want, but you don't demand it. You don't insist on it. You make sure you can hear what the other person wants as well. And perhaps come into it prepared not to get your way in any given situation. But how do we often react when there's conflict, when there's distance and difficulty in relationships?
Walls.
Mary? Say that again?
The walls go up.
The walls go up, yes. So I'm not going, and this is fascinating, I'm not going to show up in the relationship. I'm not going to tell you what I want. Why do we avoid telling people what we want in relationships?
To avoid conflict.
Well, we think to avoid conflict, but the conflict is already there because we want different things. But to avoid experiencing the conflict,
Rejection.
I think a lot of it is driven by fear. Right? And this is what I described in my story about my wife. I was afraid that if I disagreed with her, that she would be upset with me. And I didn't want her to be upset with me. We're dating. I want her to marry me, right? I want her to like me. And since I want her to like me, I'm afraid to show up and say that I have a different viewpoint or a different opinion. And when you put what you want out in front of someone else, it's like taking your treasures, right? Your very precious, much loved treasures, and laying them out on the floor in front of that person. And for all you know, they're going to walk up and go,
Not if it's a love relationship.
You're right. Not if it's a relationship where there's love and trust. But many of us are afraid, even of the significant people in our lives, that we can't trust them with the most vulnerable parts of ourselves. And if that's what's at stake in any given situation, then we often just avoid saying what we really want, sharing where we're really at. Because when you say what you want, you are now vulnerable to being hurt. Anytime I tell you what I really want, that gives you an opportunity to hurt me where it really counts. Right? How many of you ever had a boyfriend or a girlfriend? Do you remember that point in time when you knew that you liked the person, but you couldn't be confident that they were going to reciprocate? What in the world do you do? Too long ago to remember what that was like. I'm glad actually it's fading for me as well. My wife said, the wonderful thing about being married is, you don't have to deal with any of that dating, that, being confused and all those relationship games that people play. And I said, hallelujah, I'll agree with that. But you know the concept, right? And you're trying to scope out, do they like me, do they not? How would I tell without giving myself away? Why? Because if you throw yourself on the floor, with the flower and they go, ick, then your poor little heart is stomped. And you won't know what to do with yourself. I still remember in grade school of a girl that I had a crush on, and I asked a friend of mine, go ask her if she likes me, The report came back, Bruce, he's icky. Another grand romance, just went down the drain. But I didn't go ask her myself. Why?
Fear.
Because it would have hurt that much more if she had said, you're icky to my face. Now, the reality is, maybe it would have gone better if I had asked her myself, right? What's she going to say to this third party, who probably asked her in front of other people and, put her on the spot, and she would have been embarrassed if she admitted anything. I guess we'll never know. Maybe I'll have to ask her someday. Remember back in grade school? That's another time. So, one of the major reasons why we don't ask for what we want is we're afraid the other person will not only not give it to us, but might take that knowledge and use it against us. And you've done that, right? When the conflict has escalated and you are now at the point where you want to hurt that other person and you know what they really want, right? The passive-aggressive types know this. You get the silent treatment given to the person who desperately wants to make things right? That's the person you give the silent treatment to. Or you threaten some horrible consequences. I'm going to divorce you. Because that's where you can hurt someone the most. Many times we avoid asking for what we want because we believe if we don't get it, that our lives will be ruined. And that we couldn't possibly go on. And so if you don't ask, you can't have it taken away from you. What's the result of not getting this right? What happens to our relationships if we don't ask for what we want?
You have to go with whatever happens.
Yeah?
And be happy with it.
Or, more typically, you said you have to go with whatever happens and be happy with it. But more typically, you go with whatever happens and resent it.
Mm.
Have you ever known that person who, in some significant relationship in their life, has been going along with what the other person wanted and resenting it for years and years. It begins, have you noticed it begins to spill out in other parts of their lives when that happens? It's not a safe way to operate. We become doormats, martyrs. And it destroys our relationships because the person who's always getting their way knows that you resent it. But they don't know what else to do because you haven't told them what's really going on. How do you fix it? Now, maybe they don't want to fix it. Maybe they don't think they want to fix it. Maybe they enjoy being powerful and getting their way all the time. But I would put before you any human being that's worth being in a relationship with would prefer to be in a relationship with the real you, even if you disagree, than to be in a relationship with a fake you who resents them all the time. And sometimes that person who always gets their way just doesn't know it yet because they've not been given an opportunity to have a real relationship. This story maybe illustrates this a little bit. We had some friends staying with us over a weekend for a seminar early in my ministry. And at this time in my life, I was having an episode, I don't know if it would have been diagnosed as major depression, or if it was situational depression, not that you need to know the terminology, but I was depressed. I was very discouraged at this stage in my life. And so one of the things that meant was when all these people came and invaded my house, I was overwhelmed. I mean, they were my friends. I was glad that they were there. I was glad they were there for the seminar. I was happy to see them in principle. But the reality was, I was tired, and I just wanted them to go away. Because I was depressed. I was discouraged. And dealing with all of the people was tiring me out. Now, I didn't say that. I didn't even really know that. But that was the reality of the situation. And one of our friends, who was staying with us, had picked up on that, only she probably didn't know it and put it into words. But in the middle of the night, we were in our early 20s, no kids in the picture yet, and these were a bunch of young adult friends of ours. In the middle of the night, people sleeping all through the house, she said, "Hey, let's turn some pictures upside down," and whatever, as a practical joke. And so they went around the house and turned a bunch of things, upside down and hung them, funny. And in the morning, why should that be any big deal? You just turn the pictures back right side up. But we were renting the house, and some of the pictures were heavy, and when you change their position, it begins to pull the screws out of the sheetrock in the wall. And so I was a little bit disconcerted by this. And I'm going, what in the world is she doing? What's going on here? And so there was some conflict, right? It came to a little bit of a head. And I was a little bit irritated with this friend. And she said, "Well, I don't even know why I'm here. You're just, uptight and waiting for us all to leave." Mm-hmm. And I thought, whoa, wait a minute. Am I that transparent? Again, I had not put that into words, but once she said it, it was patently, obviously true. That I was just sort of hoping they would go. Waiting until the thing was over and they would go, because I didn't have the energy to deal with them, with what was going on in my head. But I was so floored by what she said. She was honest, right? It was uncomfortable, but she showed up in the relationship and told me what she wanted, right? I want to be welcome in your house, and I don't feel welcome in your house. And so I came clean, and I said, "You're right. I'm having a really hard time right now with some things, and I'm tired, and I would, just like this to be over and everybody gone, because I don't know how to deal with it." And it blew me away what happened next, because she and my other friends that were there all came around and said, "Well, what's going on? Tell us what's happening. Could we help?" I don't know. And so the whole story, I poured out the whole story to them. And they literally dropped everything else they were doing, and they sat down there and brainstormed, what's the next step? What can you do? How can we help you get through this. And literally, it was a difficult conversation that I needed to have, and was afraid to do it, and some other things, and they were ready to like literally carry me there and stand outside and pray for me while I went and had the conversation. It was incredible. Once she showed up and was honest in the relationship and asked for what she wanted, it gave me the opportunity to recognize what was going on that was wrong, and to show up and be honest about what was happening for me in the relationship. And it turned into a really beneficial conversation. What happens if you don't give other people the permission to say no when you want something? Anybody experienced that? Yeah? Anybody been guilty of that? It's got to be. Yeah. It's got to be my way. It's got to be my way. We become control freaks. We've got the other person by the neck. They're not allowed to have any say. And who they are doesn't matter. I've seen more than one marriage in which one person fears being honest but resents their spouse. And they complain, well, it's because he or she has got me by the neck. And sometimes it becomes mutual, right? Each person resenting the other one because they won't give them what they want. Different things, but two people with their hand around each other's necks, fighting it out. Do I dare ask this? You don't have to answer this. Which one is more your tendency? To not ask for what you want, or to not give permission to others to say no to you? And I'm not asking for you to answer out loud, but just for you to ponder and think about. I really appreciated, we had some friends, and this is just an illustration of maybe how to give other people permission to say no. We had some friends that used to invite us over for lunch after church nearly every week. And we liked them. We enjoyed going to their house and having lunch with them. But part of the reason why we liked it so much is because every time they asked us, they said, "We'd love to have you. You're very welcome to come. But we totally understand if it doesn't work well for you today." There was never any pressure. There was never any manipulation. They went out of their way to make sure that we felt free to come or not to come. And we loved being there because we were free to come or not to come. When I ask for help with something, I don't always do this well. When I'm in a high-strung mood and situation, I do it very poorly. But when I'm asking for help with something around the house, I try to say to my wife, when you're free, could you give me a hand with this? Instead of, I need help with this, with the expectation that I'm going to get it, and come and do this right now. When you're free, could you help me out with that? This ultimately is how love works. Awareness of the other person, acceptance of where they're at, but honesty, showing up and being present, being real in the relationship. Jesus' example does not mean that you should always give in to the other person in a situation where there's conflict, right? He had this relationship with his Father, and he said, here's what I want, but we'll do it your way, right? And we're saying this is a model, right? So do you show up in any relationship and say, this is what I want, but let's do it your way? No, it's not that simple, right? But you need to recognize that things may not go your way, and that if you insist on making them go your way, you do more damage, perhaps, than good in certain situations. So if there's a moral issue, right, you shouldn't give in to someone who's trying to get you to do something that's wrong. But if it's an inconsequential issue, if it's something where this is truly negotiable, yeah, you should come in with the expectation that I can give up my way in this situation, even though I'm going to ask for what I want. Maybe if I ask for what I want, we'll come up with a third solution that's better than either of us thought of. Worst case scenario, we end up with what you wanted. And because I love you, I'm good with that. But it's in a relationship where there's trust, right? Where the other person is at some level has your best interest at heart. I would say in many cases you don't know. If you've built up resentment over years, you don't know whether that person might respond well to your honesty and actually have your best interest at heart because you haven't been honest. So try it out and see. But don't use Jesus' example as a reason to be a doormat and get manipulated and be influenced to do something that truly is bad for you or other people. This ultimately is what it looks like to be mature in love. To put yourself out there, to be vulnerable, even if it means you might not get what you want. But to be willing to submit in mutual love to the other person with whom you have a relationship. And ultimately, isn't that the definition of maturity? Being able to delay gratification? Right? To not have things my way right now. When we're this big, we think that's normal, maybe even cute. And we're willing to sort of put up with some of that. But when we become mature, it's not so cute for adults. May God grow us up to be like Jesus, to love like Jesus, is my prayer for myself and for all of you.